Oh, welcome to a very special Sharpe Way show. It is 10 a.m., a little bit past 10 a.m. on the East Coast. And I know you're saying, Larry, you're doing a morning show? What? Yes, I am. I'm doing a morning show because last night we had, I guess, a debate. I'm not sure what we had something where two people yelled at each other, and I guess they're kind of important-ish. I don't know. But it happened. It did happen last night. That happened. And I wanted to bring on somebody who I know personally, a friend of mine who is, who could have easily dealt with these issues, answered these questions, and will have insight. And will have insight that I'm not sure that was heard at all last night, even afterwards, when the talking heads started chatting about left-right paradigms and such. He is the Libertarian vice presidential candidate. He is an economist, a former police officer, run for office many times before, a personal friend of mine, the man himself, Michael Maat. How are you, sir?
Larry, it's good to be with you. I know the real reason you want me on here is because I'm old enough to remember Joe Biden when he had it all together.
Yes, there was a time when he actually could say sentences and stuff. That was a time. Yes, 100%. I remember it too. Was that before or after he was ruining the country? I don't remember. Anyway,
that was before. Yeah, I was in Washington in the 80s and the 90s, and nobody considered Joe Biden to be the sharpest knife in the drawer. But clearly, he's a different guy.
Yes, absolutely. But the piece I wanted to bring up, which I thought was kind of in your wheelhouse, really for you. The first question they asked wasn't about age, wasn't about the war. It was about the economy, right?
Yep.
Literally your warehouse, right? The economy. And I don't know, what did you think about their answers? They talked about things like, I don't know, tariffs and such, whatever. I don't know what they were talking about. Tell me what someone like you would have, would you handle that question?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think it's a recognition that it's the number one thing on people's minds, on voters' minds. And it usually is, right, Larry?
Yes.
No matter what cycle it is, it always comes to the top. I thought it was quite revealing in the sense that I don't think either one of these candidates gets it. That Americans, you can tell them all you want that the unemployment rate is doing pretty well. The truth is that people with jobs are having a hard time making ends meet because of inflation. And until and unless you look at that for what it is, meaning the fault of the federal government, you're not going to be able to deal with it. And you're not going to be able to deal with people's disagreeable attitude toward the White House.
But Trump's answer was tariffs and such and border. Now, I'm sure the border has something to do with it. I want to be clear. I know you've been to the border. I know the border has something to do with it. But I feel like he just ran to... So it's the border and China tariffs. And all of a sudden now, we'll all be able to buy new cars. I feel like that's where he went. Is there some truth to it or no? What's the nuance there?
There's not nearly as much truth to it as the Donald would like you to believe. The truth is that tariffs increase our costs as Americans. If you're going to make goods more expensive that we're bringing in from China, and make no mistake, we bring in a tremendous proportion of our imports from China, and making them more expensive by allowing the government to tax them. That's all a tariff is. It's a tax on the stuff that we import. It's just going to make it more expensive for all of us. That's not helping inflation. That's contributing to inflation. And I don't think Donald gets that.
So Biden didn't really have an answer. He just said, look at what I've done. It's better. And there is some truth to that too, meaning it's better than during the lockdowns, right? So they always use that as compared to when I wrecked the economy, it's better than that. And that's accurate. But then, Mike, how do we get Americans to believe that we can actually get the economy to pre-lockdown world?
It's not easy, is it? Once you've spent trillions and trillions of dollars trying to make up for the stupid policy of the economic lockdowns during COVID. Once you let that horse out of the barn, it has to take its course. That is a real cost on us, and we're in the middle of bearing that cost. There's just no getting around that. The answer, of course, is not to elect these guys who think it's okay to spend trillions of your dollars. Not that all of those trillions were yours, Larry, but trillions of your dollars and trillions of my dollars. It's not okay. And the result of that, inflation, higher costs, we need an administration that understands, no, you can't be spending Americans' money and think that that's free. The costs eventually come home to roost.
So then let me shift, if I could, to the border piece, because the thing that Trump said is that one of the reasons why the economy is so bad is because so many immigrants have come across the border. They're taking up all the Social Security. They're taking all this up. And again, I'm not saying it's Trump, I'm saying this is what Trump said, right? They're taking all the jobs of all the Black people and Hispanics, right? This is what they're doing. This is the reason. Is there some truth to that? Not truth? Is there nuance? Is he wrong? What about that aspect?
Look, it's not completely untrue in the sense that these people are taking jobs. The reason it undermines our wage structure is that we don't let them work for a competitive wage. We force these people, even people who come in legally, and this is really weird, even people who come in legally, they are told they are not allowed to legally work for some period of time. And of course, all the people that come in illegally, we don't let them work legally. And for this reason, they're forced into the shadows of the labor market. They end up working for pennies on the dollar, right? Because corporations know they've got them. You know, either you take the $1 an hour I'm going to pay you, or you're, so sad out of luck.
Here in New York City, they're actually paying people $6 or $7 an hour. People who are migrants here who can't work. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's like $1 at the Arizona border, right? $6 in New York City. That's nothing. This
Right.
is what undermines the wage structure for everybody in New York who is a blue collar worker. This is what is making it hard for ends to be met by working families. And to your point about Social Security, most immigrants do not have access to government funds, but in some localities they do. And we see examples of this all over the United States, which is both, in my view, bad economics, but also politically weird. I don't understand jurisdictions who think it's a good idea politically to say, that's right, we're taxing our people to give money to people who are coming across the border because we believe that that's a better way to spend your money than you keeping that money in your own family. That's a weird political structure to share with your constituents.
So let's walk down that tax piece for a moment. Biden brought up that he thought the answer was just make sure, as we've heard, to be forward, this has been a story that's been told a lot. If the rich would just pay their fair share, then everything's fine. He actually said, if I remember right, he was about saving Social Security or something like that. I think it's just, if the billionaires just pay their fair share, yes, he said he said if they just paid their amount, then we've saved Social Security, it's done.
This is an argument for people who are bad at math. And look, I don't have any reason to stand up for rich people. The only thing, that makes me angry is that I'm not one of them. But the truth is that most income tax, for example, in the United States is paid by less than the top 2% of Americans. That's just the truth of the matter. We have an extremely progressive income tax. We do tax the poop out of rich people. I'm not suggesting that's necessarily a good or bad idea. I'm just pointing out that's the facts, right? The reason Social Security is in so much trouble is because it's a Ponzi scheme. We take money from young people to pay to old people who have been in the system for a long time. It's just a transfer. There's no such thing as an account with your name on it at Social Security that you've been paying into. Social Security is a Ponzi scheme that we have to sunset. We have to stop bringing young people in. The idea that you would force a young person into a system that's badly designed, that promises them a crappy rate of return at best, and possibly no return at all, and to do that, to take away their choice, to force them into this program, just because you badly design the system and you need to take care of the elderly overhang, that's an ethical problem. That's evil.
Okay. So with that in mind, let's shift to something that is much more, I mean, that's obviously dealing with Social Security and entitlements is always scary because generally speaking, if you get it, you know, you're stealing the money, but if I get it, I deserve it, right? That's how it usually works, right? Whatever government check I get is deserved. Whatever one you get, well, you're scamming the system.
That is human nature.
Yes. So let's go to another one, which is kind of a tough one, which is the abortion issue, right? This was, I feel like Trump actually did a decent job on this one. And what I mean by that is he was like, look, I got it done, but it's the states, it's not me. So that wasn't a bad argument. I mean, I'm clearly not going to vote for Trump. I'm not supporting Trump, but I'm being forward. This wasn't a bad response. What do you think about the abortion issue in general and how Trump and how Biden handled it?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I got no love hanging for Donald Trump either, but he is right that Roe v. Wade was a mistaken decision in the first place on technical grounds. Even the authors, right, Sandra Day O'Connor and others, admitted while they were writing it that they were motivated to make policy the same across all states in the United States, completely antithetical to the way we understand that the American government should work. But they did it for this reason anyway. And so it was flawed from the start. However you feel about abortion, however you feel about the abortion issue, it is something that should be decided by each state. And of course, this is a long-term American political principle that decisions should be made as close to the local jurisdiction as possible. As libertarians, so we agree with the Donald on that part, as libertarians, we believe that we want the government to be as little involved with all of our personal decisions as possible. And so in that sense, we want the government to remain out of it, except in those areas where absolutely positively our entire society has agreed that this is something, for example, that we are not going to tolerate. I do believe, Larry, that over time, states will coalesce around the idea that up until viability, they will, most communities are going to tolerate some form of abortion. And then after viability, it'll only be with certain exceptions for the health of the mother, for example. And I know that there are, interesting examples around the United States, Indiana being very, very conservative, other states being toward the other end of the spectrum. But I don't think Americans in general are going to put up with either all the way to one side, which is to say, in no case can anybody have an abortion ever, right? I just don't think that our society is there. Or on the other side, which is to say, up until 10 minutes before delivery, a fully viable 270-day fetus, it's okay to abort that child. I don't think people are going to put up with that either. And so it's going to be incumbent upon each state to draw that line somewhere.
Okay, there we go. Wow, you actually touched the abortion piece where they wouldn't do that. They ran away. Nicely done. So yes, guys, if you like what you're watching, do me a favor, click the like button so other people can see it also. Right? If you click that button, other people will see it. You can also share this on Twitter if you would. And if you want to follow Mike, you can. You can follow him on Twitter or X at Mike Termott. That's MAAT, the number 4 VP. Mike Termott. For VP, or follow him on his website at MikeTermott.com. And that's Termott, Trmaat. So let me move to another thing they dodged. They dodged abortion, but they also dodged the wars. They touched them, but not really, right? They didn't really touch Gaza. They didn't really touch Ukraine. Not really. They kind of dodged over it. And my gut was, and maybe I'm wrong here, but my gut was they don't want to piss off the military-industrial complex. I have no data to prove that. That's my gut. I feel like that the moderators didn't want to do that. Neither did either of the candidates. And the best we got, I think, was Trump saying, Trump and Biden had two things I think were decent, at least. I mean, not decent, weren't horrible. How about that? We're not horrible. There we go. Trump said, I'm going to end the war in Ukraine before I even take office, which that's impressive. I mean, he's going to end it before he takes office. That's amazing. That's awesome.
That would be amazing.
Yes, that would be amazing. And Biden said, we do have to have treaties and keep people safe. These were two not horrible things. But what should they have said? What's the actual answer here?
The actual answer is that Trump should negotiate our way out of Ukraine. We wish that we were not into this in the first place. This should not be our war. But here we are financing the Ukrainian army in a fashion that does not align with American values and principles. And parenthetically, frankly, just keeping it real, does not align with our long-term strategic interests. And I don't say that as an apologist for Putin or the Russian army. Indeed, Moscow is one of those few governments that makes ours look super smart by comparison. But just because you've got a misbehaved Russian army and a misbehaved Vladimir Putin doesn't mean it's necessarily incumbent upon American taxpayers to right this wrong. And so I do agree that the Donald should be engaged. If he can do it without taking office, he should be doing it right now. He should be helping negotiate our way out of that and lickety split. Look, you can put pressure on the Ukrainian government by threatening to pull our aid, which we should be doing anyway, and pressuring Putin by suggesting that if he doesn't settle, we're going to pour more aid in there. And of course, now we've got violence spilling over into Russia. So I think that Putin is going to quickly have incentive to bring this to a close. The right thing to do is not get involved in the first place, but here we are. So the right answer is to negotiate our way out of it. I think Biden's, albeit slightly coherent answer, is nonetheless the wrong policy in the long run. We recognize that we have treaties that we have to honor, but we need to negotiate our way out of those, and we need to start closing bases and bringing troops home. NATO is an excellent example where Biden wanted to criticize Trump for suggesting that we should be exiting NATO. Trump should have leaned into that. Trump should have said, you're darn right, I want out of NATO. I want the Europeans to finance their own defense. And if they need help, we're just an ocean away, but we should not be obliged to back up any stupid thing that the Europeans get themselves into.
No, it's a valid point. Again, that I was surprised actually with that. I thought Trump would lean in. I thought he'd be like, yes, but he was like, no. I just made him pay more. We should stay. Military industrial complex, good. Right.
To your point, yes. I don't understand why both of these candidates, I get Joe Biden. He's a long-term statist. He is what he is. You're not going to expect that rock to roll down a different hill all of a sudden. But Donald Trump, I really was surprised to see that he apparently also has some fear of crossing the military-industrial complex, or he believes, and these can both be true, the other piece is that he may believe that he has a number of Republican constituents who like the idea of American taxpayer money being used to project military hegemony around the world. And to the extent to which that's true, I blame politicians for fear-mongering.
Okay. So let's touch the other tough one, which is Gaza. I feel like both of them are want to continue fighting in Gaza. Like I didn't see either one of them talking about bringing that war to a close. Like same thing. At least Trump did say he wanted to bring the Ukraine war to a close. Again, not horrible.
Right.
But when it came to Gaza, they both were like, no, just keep fighting. That war's the good war.
Yeah, I thought that was really awful. And to your point about fearing the military-industrial complex, and my point that there's political forces, they come together in Israel, right? Because the military-industrial complex does benefit because a lot of the money that we give Israel comes back to our corporations, and a lot of the aid that we give to Israel is directly benefiting those military arms producers in the United States. And there are political forces inside the United States that want to stand behind the Israeli government because they believe that they're standing behind the Israeli people, and that it is in the long-term interest of the Israeli people to continue prosecuting the war in Gaza the way that it is. All of which I believe is incorrect. I do not believe it is in the interest of the Israeli people to prosecute this war of the style that it has been prosecuted. I don't think that the long-term strategic interests of the Israeli people are in lockstep with what the IDF and the Israeli government are pursuing. I think there's a mismatch there. And for that reason, I think in the long run, Netanyahu is actually in a great deal of political trouble. I think his legacy is on the line. I know he believes, as a hardcore conservative, that he is about to settle a legacy that is all positive, all good, keeping Israel safe. But I do fear that the next generation will look back at this as a dark chapter in Israeli history.
So then let's move to the next thing that people are afraid of. And I don't remember who brought it up, but the idea of if we don't stay in NATO, we're basically on our way to World War III. That's a fear that people have for sure. Where do you stand on that? Are we really on the brink? Is this, in other words, is this just America? This is Vietnam. This is Korea. This is Iraq. Yeah, we're just going to keep fighting proxy wars. Or are we really on the cusp of something different?
I think that we are always on the cusp of something different, and that each and every one of these proxy wars since Vietnam and earlier, you can go back to Korea, you can go back before that, these proxy wars, each one represents a possible escalated conflict. Each one represents a possible introduction on the doorstep of another world war, or at the very least, massive hot war, even if only in one theater, massive hot war with a major regional power. That's what each one of these conflicts represents. And so, personally, I am not a fan of us engaging in these conflicts over and over and over and over, because each one represents another spin of the wheel. And I fear that at some point we're going to get ourselves into a situation that's more difficult from which to extricate ourselves. It is very easy for these things to go wrong. You cannot control other powers in the region in which these things happen. You cannot correctly predict what other foreign leaders are going to do. We can't even predict, Larry, what our own White House is going to do. And so each one of these represents an extremely high risk, and each one represents a potential trigger. This is why I think that we should be out of NATO, because it is a trigger waiting to be pulled. Just because we exit NATO doesn't mean we can't help the Europeans if we decide that they're in a conflict in which they need help and it's in America's long-term strategic interest to do so. But this idea that NATO is necessarily in our interest, I think a lot of folks, including me, would argue that NATO is a piece of the problem that contributed to the conflict in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would agree with you on that one. Absolutely. But again, I think it's fear. It's fear. Let me move, if I could, then to another. This was something that I think a lot of people get upset about. It's almost like a litmus test. And that is January 6th, right? If you say January 6th is an insurrection, then you go on this side. If you say no, the cops let him in, then you go on this side, right? It's almost like a litmus test. And
absolutely, it's a Rorschach test. What do you see here?
Yes, absolutely, right? And I feel like Trump didn't defend his people as I thought he would, right? Biden was like, they're all evil, put them all in jail forever. He was hardcore. He was like, all of them should bury them under the jail. He was 100% all.
Right.
But
shoot
Trump
him and then
kind of dodged. Yes. Shoot him first, prosecute dead bodies. Exactly right. Yes. But Trump was not the reverse as strong. He seemed to dodge a bit. What did you feel about that? And how do you feel about that whole issue?
I thought that was extremely interesting. And no one is talking about that today. Good for you for bringing it up. I think that Trump has an advisor who got in his head and said, there are some people outside of your base that you want to have vote for you. And so, the people who agree with us on January 6th, boss, the people who agree with you and with our team on January 6th, they're not going to accidentally vote for Joe Biden. I think that we need to stop looking insensitive regarding the way that some people saw January 6th, because even if, look, a lot of people believe that Donald Trump is being dealt a fairly unfair deal with regard to being prosecuted for January 6th, that he didn't lead an insurrection. He behaved badly. He said a lot of stupid things, right? Okay, we all get that. Given that, notwithstanding that, none of that means that there wasn't some violence there. There was, and we saw it with our own eyes, right? You're not going to successfully gaslight us into believing that some of those people weren't violent. Not the majority. We're not talking about people who just did something dopey like trespass. Some of those people were violent. And for this reason, even Donald Trump, I think, needs to be careful to say, well, they were all wonderful, right? They were just protesting. I think that you need to be careful with that, because people did see what it is that we all saw. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a nuanced approach. When you're dealing with thousands of people,
sure,
that's right, you're going to get some that did some things that mean they need to be held accountable, and some of those people needed to go to jail. And then there's other people that just followed along and found themselves, in effect, trespassing, probably too dopey to even know what it is that they were doing. Those are two different groups of people. And so I think a nuanced response is perfectly acceptable. I wasn't a big fan of Joe Biden not realizing that.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think that's absolutely. Well, so let's go to the next piece then. When it comes to people going to jail and being convicted, Trump is now convicted. And his response was, you did it. Everyone knows that you did it, for political reasons, and that now I'm going to win. I'm more popular than ever. And Joe Biden was like, no, you're a bad guy and you're done. Is it that black and white? Is there some nuance to that?
I suppose there's nuance, but they can both be true at the same time. Even bad people have politicians come after them with politically motivated prosecutions, right? Donald Trump is a jerk. We know that. He's self-interested. He's self-motivated. He is his number one fan. He doesn't like the idea of losing. He would do anything to reverse what he saw as an illegitimate election. Now, did he do anything illegal in that sense? I don't know for sure, but I do know that these prosecutions are politically motivated. In many cases, the prosecutors have said so in advance, saying, if you elect me, I'll go after Donald Trump. I'm sorry, you can't say that and then gaslight us into believing that they're not politically motivated. So of course they are. Trump has done a great job of spinning that to his advantage. We all get that. But none of that means that Donald Trump isn't a jerk, right? We get all that. And to be honest, the one that bothers me the most is not this, silliness over the hush payments. That was the weirdest prosecution of all, in my view. The one that bothers me was the civil case in which the woman in New York accused him of a sexual assault. That's a big deal. Yeah, that's a big deal in terms of what it was that she was alleging. On the other hand, it was a case that the police never brought criminal charges. She never filed a criminal complaint. There was no evidence that this actually took place. I'm not suggesting it didn't. How do I know? But you get the point that this is a much more serious accusation than you check the wrong box on your FEC form for $130,000 payment, right? This is a serious accusation, and yet it was handled in just the worst possible way. It's just an example of something I think is more important and more goofy simultaneously.
So let's stay on what I think is more important and was also kind of washed away, which was Assange. Not brought up. Pardoning people. Ulbricht, not brought up. Snowden, not brought up. Just not brought up by CNN, not brought up by them,
right.
And then if you look at, I did punish myself last night, Mike. I did watch a bunch of the post-debate show.
Yes.
So some of you don't have to. So I did punish myself and not
Thank
brought
you.
up. Yes, not brought up at all. It was only about how bad or how good it was. That's it. So why do you think they ignored that?
I think that's really weird, and I think it's weird for these go in a couple different categories. We tend to lump them all together. I think they go in two different categories. The Ross Ulbricht case is, I think, extremely important, and I'm surprised nobody brought it up because Trump had made mention at the Libertarian National Convention, right, that he would take care of this, and no one is holding him accountable. He's no longer talking about it. Mm-hmm. And it seems like our worst fears of having been manipulated at the LNC could come to fruition, that he really, is every bit the liar that we were afraid he was. We'll see over time, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing that I find really weird is that in the Assange case, we're talking about broadly writ journalism.
Right.
If you're not going to stand up for your own peeps, what good are you? Right? Mm-hmm. How is it you're not standing up for a fellow journalist? Now, some of these people don't consider themselves to be in the same category as Assange. I get that. But the First Amendment protects your organization, CNN, and your organization, Fox News, in the same way that it should have been protecting Assange. And let's remember, Assange is not the one who stole information. He was at the receipt. He's a publisher. He's a journalist. If you're not standing up for that guy, what are you doing with your life? Mm-hmm. And so that one really bothered me a lot.
So with that in mind, let's shift to them not remembering things. Let's shift to the cognitive piece. Let's shift to the age piece. And there's two parts I want to bring up here. They're two separate issues. One of them is, do you think the American people actually cared about it either way, before or after, right? Did that change? And then, should it matter? Both of those things, right? Did they care? And then, should we care? Those two things. Can you cover those?
Yeah. I think that it was a tipping point for each candidate, but in a very different way.
Okay.
Joe Biden, I did not think Joe Biden looked much different last night than he has over the past several months, which is to say really bad. But I thought it was approximately what I had expected. He's been looking really bad. He's old. He looks old. He shouldn't be working anymore, much less as president of the United States. He is not the guy that he used to be. I'm a little surprised at how much reaction there has been to what it is that, you and I have been seeing for months and months and months. It's a tipping point. I think that a lot of Americans maybe weren't paying attention. I get that. Mm-hmm. But here, their hero, for those in the Democratic Party that were Biden supporters, their hero has in effect embarrassed them. It's one thing when it's off to the side or it's at an event, not too many people see it. It's another thing to be the guy who's supposed to slay the Donald Trump dragon.
Yes, absolutely.
And you come out there and you cannot get it done. Now it's a problem, right?
Right.
Who gets most angry when the Cubs lose? I do, right? That's my team. You're my guys. You know, when you make a wild pitch for the Cubs, I get much more angry than when some schmuck from the Mets does it. What do I care? You get my point.
Right. No, I get it.
And I think that we've reached a tipping point where people are just not going to have it at this point. And I think there's a
second piece here.
Yeah.
And the second piece is I feel like for so many people, if you're watching and you're a Democrat, tell me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to put it in the comments if you like. The question is, I feel like so many, particularly mainstream Democrats, like people who just kind of, I've been a Democrat for years. Whenever I watch the news, I watch CNN or MSNBC. When I watch the news, maybe my local news, they've been telling me that Biden's great. They've been telling me that he's fine. That's what I've been hearing from people, that he's fine. It's ageism. It's the evil Republican saying he's bad. He's fine. And now I show up and I watch this thing and I go, oh, he's not fine. Like, he's not fine. I feel like there's almost a betrayal.
Yes.
That's how I felt.
Because they counted on him backing up their assertions that he was fine. He wasn't able to do it. Now you make us look bad.
Right.
This now is a problem. So I do think,
go ahead.
I do think the party is scrambling today. I do think they're looking for someone else. I don't think that that's going to be easy, but I do think it's important. And I think it's important to the Democratic Party. I think it's also parenthetically important to the democratic process. I even think it's important to people who aren't Democrats. The Democratic Party demonstrate that it can get its act together and do something useful. Pardon me, I have a cold this month. Rather than just back up a sitting president who always should have been viewed as a transitional figure. Now, let me add, I think it was a tipping point for Donald Trump in a very different way.
Okay.
This whole turning off the microphone thing was the greatest thing anyone ever could have done for him.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, you're not wrong.
The guy looks more disciplined. He looks more rational. He looks more under control. He looked less of a jerk, right? He physically looked better than he has in months, in my view. He looks like he may have lost a couple of pounds. His hair didn't look as silly as usual. I mean, he had a good night. And not just by comparison to Biden, but by comparison to all of this buildup about how awful he is.
Right.
So if you're in the middle as a voter, you see that guy and you think, maybe he's not as bad as everyone says, right? If the Democrats hadn't been accusing him of such over-the-top things, if we didn't have all these prosecutions, if we hadn't been calling him, the worst world leader since Hitler, if we had not been saying all these things, then viewers come to that debate and say, I don't know, that guy's kind of a putz. He's kind of a jerk. But because the bar had been set so high in terms of how bad he is, I'm sorry. I think a lot of people probably looked at that and said, yeah, he's kind of a buffoon, but not that bad, right?
Right. It's almost the opposite of Biden.
More disciplined.
So it was the opposite of Biden.
Yeah, exactly. I think, a lot of CNN people today are saying Biden had a bad night. Trump didn't have a good night. I don't think that's true. I think Trump had a good night and Biden had a bad year last night.
So let me ask then, what's your gut tell you? What's the outcome of this, right? Because there are people there's conspiracy people. I watched all the sides last night, right? Who are saying, see, Trump was actually playing 4D chess because he was trying to win, but not win that bad. That's why he didn't come out swinging, because he doesn't want Biden to be replaced because he knows he can beat. I'm not joking. This is an actual thing. So he's playing 4D chess, and so he didn't come out swinging. It wasn't the mic thing. He didn't come out swinging because he wanted to make sure he just beat up Biden enough, but not too much, so they replace him. Do you have a view on whether he'll be replaced or won't be replaced, or whether Trump thought that, or any of that stuff?
I think that's akin to saying that Mike and Larry get along because we secretly want each other to go to jail. I don't think that that's true.
I knew you were against me the whole time, Mike. I knew you were.
I do. I plot against you during the week. That's how important you and I are. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to be a tremendous movement to replace Joe Biden. Tremendous movement. On the other side, there is tremendous inertia. I'm looking at the clock now. It's June 28. Time is almost out. Not quite, but almost out. To pull this off would be a big lift. Not impossible, but a big lift. And so I think it's very difficult to predict if Joe Biden had this performance even a few months ago, it would have been lights out, right? But because it's almost July and their convention is in August, they're going to have to get their ducks in a row. It also means an open convention. So, I don't know if you've ever been to an open convention, Larry, but they can get messy.
Yes, they can. Yes, they can. But I do want to give a little bit of pushback here. Don't you think there are enough greedy politicians, power-hungry Democrats who smell blood in the water and are like, ooh, this is my chance, right? Now, all of a sudden, Gavin Newsom is the one everyone's talking about, right? He goes, oh, now I got my shot. Let me jump in, right? Or, pick Democratic governor. Cuomo wants to come back out of retirement or whatever. Right now is my time to come back and try to do something, to the point where even if they don't win or actually knock off the king, they become popular in their attempt, right? For example, This is something that I would see a Cuomo doing. Cuomo's not going to win, but this gets him back in the spotlight again, right? Even if he loses this thing. Don't you see some of that?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with 100%. Especially Gavin Newsom is going to be the primary example of that. Yeah, if you're the governor of Michigan, maybe you've got reasons to play the long game. If you're the vice president of the United States, I think you're hemmed in a little bit because it's a bad look to try to throw your boss overboard. But Gavin Newsom is absolutely going to be on the warpath beginning this morning, beginning last night, undoubtedly behind the scenes. The over-under on the number of days, I think, is about 7 before we see him in a more public fashion, traveling around, making nice with Democrats. He will not be able to resist. It's too much of an opportunity, with which I agree, by the way. That would be my advice to him, is to jump all over this. These opportunities don't come along every day. I don't know how it's going to be decided, Larry. My gut says there's a 51% chance that they will replace Joe Biden, and 61% chance that there'll be an open convention. And, it will not be decided until that final gavel comes down. But it may be an open convention at which they eventually coalesce around Joe Biden.
So let me ask. Do you have a few minutes for me to take some questions, comments?
Yeah.
All right, let me grab a couple if I could. James says, without RFK, Oliver, Stein, West, or Terry, I doubt it was an actual debate. And, this is a valid point here, right? What I think bothers me, clearly, Mike, if you were on that debate stage, if Chase Oliver was on that debate stage, I mean, they wouldn't have been able to get away with what they got away with. There's just no way that would have happened. This is a valid point. Do you think people get that now, or no? Was this just another? Was this blown by? Obviously, in our world, people are saying this, but do you think the normies? I'll use that phrase. Do the normies think like James, or no? What's your gut?
A few, not as many as we wish. Definitely a few who are going to look at that and say, same two guys that we've seen before. We knew what they were going to say. We know what they're like. We know, even what their behaviors are like when they're in the White House, quite literally. And so, this wasn't really all that interesting. The problem is that a lot of those people would not have watched the debate at all. And so they've kind of tuned out. I do think that the whole Joe Biden meltdown takes away from the momentum that says the real story is who is not in that stage.
Got it. Okay.
It is an important story. I think that RFK should have been on there. Chase Oliver, 150% should have been on that stage. Chase is very good at fielding questions. He's very good with policy. He is the right guy. His solutions, our team's solutions, are real for America. They align with American values. And I think that American voters would have enjoyed hearing them. And they would have enjoyed hearing a different perspective. It would have been more fun, more interesting, more engaging.
He's got you as an economic advisor to help him on that one too, so even better.
It's a perfect world. It's a perfect storm, isn't it? And of course, Chase
Absolutely.
is only half the age of those guys. I have a full head of hair, and Joe Biden is more like my mother's age. Think about that. That's weird. So Chase would have given him a stark contrast just in, demography alone. And yes, I do think that it doesn't make any sense that RFK was kept off the stage as well. It should have been a four-way.
Got it. So Michael Voss from No Soundbots Live says Biden was comparing everything to the global lockdown, not 2019. And I think they never call him out on this. Mike is right on this one, right? They never say, okay, what about prior to the lockdowns? And I feel like no one ever calls him out. Even Trump didn't.
Well, that's a good point. I get the impression that the Donald is actually so proud of the lockdowns, or at least not sufficiently embarrassed by the lockdowns, that he doesn't want to bring it up, highlight it, even to the point of drawing a contrast. I don't know, but he needs better shtick. He needs an economist or just a politician to tell him exactly that point. Now, he has said a few times that the economy was running very, very well pre-COVID. He has said things like, we had the best economy in the world, right? By the way, the economy was awfully strong in 2019. He needs to lean into that much more. I think that's an excellent point.
So I don't know how to say it. I think it's humbug says he's right, meaning you, Mike. There are Uber drivers that are in America because their spouse has a job at a university or hospital, and they're not allowed to work except for ride sharing. So this is a thing that a lot of people don't get. It isn't just the, quote, illegal immigrants, right, to your point. It isn't just that. It's migrants in general. Many of them have trouble finding work or being able to work legally. So they either don't work or they work in the black market or something else. Bad.
It is bad. It is bad for them, but it is also bad for the overall wage structure, which is to say, at the bottom, you're competing for pennies on the dollar. You're not putting pressure on wages throughout the rest of the economy like you should be. And so that's a real problem. We need to get off of this idea that people aren't allowed to work in the United States. I personally, to be frank, I'd be more comfortable with a policy that says you have to get to work. I would rather call an immigrant and say, it's been 6 weeks. Do you have a job yet? Right. What are we doing? Recruiting people that don't want to work? It makes no sense.
Absolutely. That's good. Liberty Shamrocker says they also had 50 plus years to codify Roe v. Wade as law, but they know emotionally people vote two issues, abortion or 2A, when the chips are down. And this is a really valid point. Biden did not say, I would codify Roe v. Wade. He didn't say that. He didn't say I would put a law, he didn't say that. What he said was, I would not sign a full abortion ban. So even he is like, wow, let's keep this issue going. Trump is, let's keep this issue going. They're both okay with keeping the issue going. And 2A, same thing. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it?
It's the new immigration policy debate. We kept immigration policy as a debate going for decades now, so that the Republicans and Democrats could blame each other for being even more stupid than they themselves are. And I think that we're looking at the same phenomenon here. The more that we can debate it and the less that we can bring resolution, the more some of these politicians are able to raise money off of it. And so, allowing states to make these determinations, as we believe is the correct thing to do, is a financial boon for some of these politicians who don't want to bring a resolution at all.
Right. Mike Lehman brings up a very important point. He says, I'm all for huge cuts in government, but in this economy, over 3/4 of the population will pull their money, maybe more. And I think what he means is there are, and you know this, we're in a bad spot now, right? To your earlier point about being in the wars, right? We shouldn't have gotten the wars, but we're there. We shouldn't have so many people working for the government, either directly or indirectly through contracts, or getting so many checks through either Social Security, disability, whatever the case may be. But man, is it true? Like, there are a lot of people who are getting money from the government now, either directly or indirectly through contracts or something like that. How do we make these cuts when we've created an internal welfare state, right? He's got a valid point here, doesn't he?
I think he absolutely does. It reminds me of Barack Obama saying, people may not understand the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, not yet dubbed at the time. People may not understand it, but once they get used to it, they will love it. Meaning once they get on it, once they start getting their discounts and their checks, they'll fall in love with it. No one will ever vote against it. And of course, he was damned right. Look, there's a couple of things that need to be said here. One is, absolutely, we do need to reform our entitlement programs and bring as many of them to full sunset as possible and as rapidly as possible. The federal government in the United States is going to fail. There will be a financial collapse before the middle of this century, unless there's a profound course correction that neither you nor I are predicting. If there is not a profound course correction, the government will collapse. When that happens, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, when that happens, all of your favorite entitlement programs are going to be corrected in a devastating, unplanned, horrible way, right? For this reason, we need an orderly takedown of government programs. The way that I believe that this must play out is an overall cap on government spending, and then to ratchet down that cap over time so that all the various programs take a haircut. If you were to ask Congress to vote on a particular program that needs to be haircut, good luck with that. No one's going to stand up and say, sure, count me in. I'm the guy or gal that voted against Social Security. People just aren't going to do it, right? I don't mind calling Social Security evil because Social Security is evil. But people are not going to want to stand up in our legislature and vote against increasing benefits. So we need a total cap that's politically easier. We've had caps in the past. When I worked for the White House in 90, 91, 92, we had omnibus budget reconciliation law that capped spending. And if you spent any more money, you had to come up with a way to save money, or else there'd be an across-the-board haircut. We need that kind of attitude again.
There we go. Okay. James brings up a very interesting point. He says, one weird fact I learned from taking the I side with quiz was that Libertarians, Greens, and Constitution Party don't support NATO, while the major parties want to preserve NATO. He asks, why is that? It's very interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting. I think a huge piece of it is what you put your finger on earlier. There's a tremendous amount of money at stake from the military-industrial complex. I think that the amount of money that goes into the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, both at the presidential level and at the local level, is staggering. If people realize what proportion of politics were financed by war, in effect, you would really be surprised. I think it's very difficult for the Republican and Democratic parties to get away from it. Regarding the other parties, I think that given that there's not a tremendous amount of money at stake coming from the military-industrial complex, there's a lot more honesty. And the honesty is that our foreign policy, our militaristic, interventionistic policy does not align with our values as Americans. And as a practical matter, doesn't work. Americans would not point to examples of our military interventions lately and say it was worth it. That, sure, we lost 1,000 people there, or we lost $1 billion there, but it was still worth it. There aren't examples of that.
Right. Huh. This one is a little bit off topic. If you don't want to answer, it's okay. John says Trump's VP will be a neocon. Nikki, Tom Cotton, or Tim Scott. Do you have a view on who you think his VP pick will be?
I think it probably will be a neocon, just for the same reasons that we outlined. It's conceivable that he'll have an awakening and decide to have, someone who's less militaristic, who can do a better job of reaching, say, young people or more libertarian-minded people. That would not be a bad strategic move. I would suggest battling for, the middle of the voting spectrum and battling for unaligned voters by doing exactly that. I don't think he will. I think it probably will be Tim Scott, and it will be, therefore, someone who buys into the same style of foreign policy as we've had for decades.
My gut says that it's going to, I've already publicly said it, so it's too late if I'm wrong. It'll either be Vivek, Elise Stefanik, or Tim Scott. I think those are my top three in that order. And I think it's more about raising money more than anything else. I think that's going to be
It could well be. My top three are Tim Scott and Tim Scott and Tim Scott. So we'll see if one of those three guys makes it. I like Tim Scott. He is a neocon. But outside of that, he strikes me as a well-meaning guy. He's not bad at fundraising. But there's another, don't forget, Larry, there's the Donald ego factor.
Yes.
Which is to say, whoever is best at kissing his ass. And Tim Scott has been pretty effective. Tim was on television just yesterday with his fiance. Clearly, they're positioning Tim as a more familial figure.
Yes, absolutely. Well, another one for opinion. I got some opinions, I guess, for you this time. Andrew says, why is the DNC keep pushing him past his limit? It's beyond my belief. So
it's
why
awful,
do you think
it?
that? Yes, but why do you think? I'm going to bring up something that's going to sound weird. There was a part of me yesterday, and you'll understand because I'm human. I'm human. A part of me that felt sorry for Joe Biden. I felt sorry for Joe Biden. There was a part of me that did. I was does he even know? Like, do they get like? There was a part of me that thought it's almost elder abuse. There was like a part of me that felt sorry for him, actually.
I think a lot of Americans feel that way, Larry. I think you're absolutely correct. You put your finger right on it. I think a lot of us, myself included, really feel bad for the guy. I think that you should be angry with his family, to be honest, his closest friends, and yes, the DNC. Now, how did the DNC get in here? There's a couple of factors. You can't put your finger on any one. There's a natural inclination to say, well, an incumbent president is our best, the best horse to ride. There is the natural inclination to do what the boss wants. And no matter how out of touch he may be, if he wants to run again, it may well be that no one has been able to convince him otherwise. I don't know who is trying to convince him otherwise, but his wife should be leading that charge.
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
It's a real problem. And then the other factor is, as you and I know, internal politics can be pretty robust. And so, when the Gavin Newsom people call and say, we think it's time for Joe to step down, the Joe Biden people are going to tell those people to go pound sand. So everyone's afraid of losing their job, right? And a lot of people who are making this decision and influencing the president of the United States are people who would lose their job if that decision were for him to step down.
Well, the funny thing is you bring this up, right? Because there's a couple of the comments I'm going to kind of put together into one, which is people are talking about Gavin Newsom. Because the problem is, of course, in theory, at least traditionally, if Biden steps down, well, then Kamala Harris steps up, right? That's kind of tradition. And everybody knows she's hated. Democrats don't like her. Republicans, nobody likes her. I don't think her family likes her. Nobody likes her, right? Nobody likes this woman at all. They don't like her at all. So they're worried. So if Newsom comes in, most people don't know this, Newsom and Kamala are from the same state. So it pushes Kamala out immediately. So she has to walk away. It solves two problems. And Joe brings this up. Joe says Harris and Newsom are from the same state, can't do it constitutionally. Yes, absolutely. So that's an important piece. And already, I think Newsom's already out talking stuff. He's already talking out. Jonathan says Newsom let the cat out of the bag a couple of times last night during his post-debate interview. He said, I will win multiple times. What's your view on the new, again, this is opinion stuff, Mike. If you don't want to answer, I get it, but I'm on Newsom versus Kamala versus what the next step is. Do you have a view on this at all?
Yeah. My view is that Kamala is out of here. She goes along with Joe Biden. She's attached to Joe Biden. Nobody else likes her. It's done. Her political future ends on January 20 when someone else, Donald Trump or another Democrat, I hope it's Chase Oliver, when someone else is sworn in, she's done. I don't think Gavin Newsom would have an interest. I don't think people in the Newsom team are saying, oh, what a shame that Kamala's from our same state and we can't have her as a running mate. I don't think they're terribly concerned about that. By the way, I think the constitutional remedy is you have to give up that state electorally. So if they were both from Montana, this might be survivable. But being
right. Yeah, you can't lose California.
You can't lose California and win as a Democrat, that's for sure. So yeah, this is an insurmountable hurdle, and there's no gaslighting people into believing that Kamala is from, Washington, D.C. That's just not going to happen. So I think that, it will be a huge push for Newsom, and we'll just see whether he's able to overcome that inertia with the Democratic National Committee and whether they can get that convention opened up. They get that convention opened up, that's going to be worth watching.
Yes, absolutely. So Brian brings up, I think, kind of your point. He's joking when he says it, but he says paying their fair share, he means the wealthy, will generate $500 billion over 10 years when the interest alone on the national debt is over $1 trillion just this year. That's Biden. Now you've talked about the debt many times.
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to handle this debt if we make the change now, or are we done? Like I remember a comedian once was saying a joke. He's like, you don't understand something, we're in trouble. And the other guy in the joke says, what? He goes, we owe, China, like whatever the number was. I'm making it up. We owe China $10 trillion. I don't know if that's true. I made it up. Right? $10 trillion. He's like, what? Yeah, we're in trouble. He said, we owe China $10 trillion. China's in trouble, not us. We're not paying that back. How does that work?
There is an old saying, Larry, I spent the first part of my career in banking. There's an old saying, if you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $1 billion, you own the bank.
There we go.
Yeah.
So Brian's on the money here.
I think he's on the money, so to speak. That may be a poor choice of words. I think that we're in deep trouble. You cannot tax your way out of this. You certainly can't tax your way out of this by going after the wealthy. If you do, they'll just move to, wherever they're going to move to, whether it's Mexico or the UK or Russia or Australia. They're going to move someplace where they can get a better deal, and no one should blame them one iota. Corporations as well, by the way. You cannot tax your way out of this. The only way to do this is to cut spending.
So I want to bring up a question that John brings up. He said you visited Florida. He says, "Hey Mike, thanks for your awesome visits in Florida. In a free market, we should be able to buy weapons from small companies, overseas companies, or anywhere else. If we have this type of style, obviously he's asking, is this a way to bring about the end of the military-industrial complex?"
I don't know. Look, he's right? You should have the ability to buy anything you want from anyone around the world. But having said that, would the U.S. government buy from anyone else? That answer is probably no, because there is an iron triangle there, right? Among the donor class and voters to a certain extent, but the donor class, the military-industrial complex, and politicians, it's just that is not going to get broken. There's just no way to get around that, and so I would advocate for it nonetheless. But I do believe that the only way that we're going to tame the military complex is to change foreign policy, and fairly profoundly.
So I do want to, these are not questions. I just want to recognize some comments, if I could, for a moment. Dave says he agrees with you. He says, I definitely see Tim Scott as a front runner for Trump's VP. There we go. Jonathan goes on to say the LW's hotline crashed last night. So there we go. Yes. Snyder, who's running, by the way, in Florida, says the way Jill Biden talked to him like a 4-year-old, praising him for answering all the questions, was about as cringe as it gets. We saw firsthand last night Dems have been lying to us about his abilities. Yes. I mean, I don't know if you saw, did you happen to see that piece of her going, you did so good. Did you see that?
I did not see that. I have seen her do that in the past, however, yes. So I can imagine.
Yeah, it was, she was like, it was almost like she was his mom. I mean, it really was odd. It was like she was his mom.
No, I get it. Well, she has to play a maternal role because he needs a little bit of caretaking, right? And for all we know, quite a bit of caretaking behind the scenes. This is all the more reason why Americans should not be confident that he's actually running the White House, much less the government, much less adequately negotiating with foreign leaders. Who is running these policies? I think that is a very, very valid question, because it is unlikely to be the same guy who gets told good job by his wife.
Yes. Yes. So guys, if you're watching, I'm talking to the audience here, and you like it, please click the button that is like. Click that like button. It does matter. It gets this out to more people. Please do so. If you're watching on Twitter, you can always retweet this right now. Share it on Facebook, whatever you want. Please, this goes on many platforms. Share it far and wide, please, so we can have this conversation with more and more people. Mike, is there anything that we should be bringing up? But before you answer that question, guys, follow Mike too. Follow him on Twitter if you would. Mike Termat 4VP. If you're listening only, it's MikeTermaat, the number 4 VP, or go to his website, see what he's doing, MikeTermat.com. You can help him out, sign up. He's got a lot of work to do. He's not done. He got lots of work to do. He could use some help. Go help him out if you can.
Thank you, Larry. Chase and I are on the road. We're working very, very hard. Anyone out there who is not familiar with Chase Oliver, do yourself a favor as an educated consumer of politics and familiarize yourself. You're going to like what you see. A young man who's been involved as a peace activist for a long, long time, caused a very disruptive election and special election in Georgia when he ran for Senate. Excellent skills, does a great job of reaching out to young people, and a great standard bearer for libertarian philosophy. I think you're really going to like what you see. You can go to votechaseoliver.com. Yeah, you can go to MikeTermat.com. Find out everything you want there. Reach out to me personally. By the way, Larry, if there's anyone out there that is getting annoyed by the $50 in their wallet, they can offload that at votechaseoliver.com or MikeTermat.com and play a role in this campaign in getting the message out. Americans have a preferable choice than what you saw last night.
There we go. There we go. Do we have time for one more question?
One more. Let's do it.
All right. Craig says, he asks, what do you think world leaders thought last night?
I think that is an excellent question. And I think the answer is, I think what they're wondering is, who is running the White House? Who's running the State Department? They know, where is the State Department getting their leadership? Is it really from the White House at all? And that is an open question. But if there is any doubt in your mind, it was removed last night that the President of the United States is not running foreign policy.
There we go. Guys, I want to say thank you so much for watching. Do me all a favor, if you would. Once this live is over, please come back. Whatever you are watching on, whether you're watching on X or Facebook or YouTube, come back and leave a comment. It works very well for Mr. Al Gore Rhythm. He likes it very much if you do that. So please do that.
He did invent the internet, Larry.
He did invent the internet. Correct. That's why he does that. So yes. So he likes it. So please do that. Come back. Do that if you would, to make sure this gets out to as many people as possible. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all. By the way, Mike, thank you for all your time.
Oh, thank you, Larry. It's a joy to be with you every time.
Excellent. And I will see you all very soon.